Welcome to the Haybed, a heartwarming tale of unlikely love between Livia, a drifter seeking temporary work, and Eduardo, a wealthy ranch owner haunted by his past. Their worlds collide when Livia chooses to sleep in a stable's hay rather than accept charity, setting the stage for a beautiful journey of healing, trust, and finding home in the most unexpected places. Before we begin this story, comment below where you're watching from. The morning sun beat down on Livia's back as she walked the dusty road to Alto Sky Ranch. At 25, she carried nothing but a worn backpack containing all her worldly possessions. 3 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, and a small photograph of her mother, the only family she'd ever known. Just a little further, she told herself, wiping sweat from her brow. The job offer had come at exactly the right time. 3 weeks. Without work had left her with just enough money for a bus ticket to this rural town. The employment agency had warned her it was just temporary farm work, but Livia didn't care. Temporary was better than nothing. The ranch appeared over the horizon, a sprawling property with white fences, green pastures, and a large farmhouse in the distance. Cattle grazed lazily in the fields. It looked peaceful. Safe. Livia approached the main gate, where a middle-aged woman with graying hair was hanging laundry on a clothesline. "Excuse me," Livia called out. "I'm looking for Mr. Eduardo Montero. I'm the new farmhand." The woman squinted at her. "You're the girl from the agency?" "Yes, ma'am. Livia Santos. I'm Martha, the housekeeper. Wait here." Martha disappeared into a small office building near the entrance. Moments later, she returned with a stocky man in his 50s. "I'm Carlos, the foreman," he said, extending a weathered hand. "Mr. Montero is away on business today. I handle hiring." "Nice to meet you," Livia replied, trying to hide her nervousness. Carlos looked her up and down. "Farm experience?" "Some. I worked at the Miller farm last spring." "I'm a hard worker." Carlos nodded skeptically. "We need help with the horses and the morning milking. Season lasts 3 months. Pay is weekly." "That works for me," Livia said quickly. "About lodging?" Carlos hesitated. "Worker housing is being renovated. Won't be ready for 2 weeks. We can arrange a room in town, but I don't need special arrangements," Livia interrupted. "Is there anywhere on the property I could stay?" "I don't mind simple accommodations." Carlos scratched his chin. "Well, there's the old office in the barn." "It's not exactly—" "That's fine," Livia assured him. "Really? I don't need much." Martha gave Carlos a concerned look, but remained silent. "Come on then," Carlos said. "I'll show you around." The tour of Alto Sky Ranch revealed a well-maintained operation. The main house stood on a hill, a beautiful 2-story building with a wide porch and rocking chairs facing the sunset. But Carlos steered Livia away from it toward the working parts of the ranch: the dairy barn, chicken coops, stables, and equipment sheds. "We start at 5, Carlos explained. "Breakfast at 7, lunch at noon, dinner at 6. Martha handles meals." Livia nodded, taking it all in. "And Mr. Montero, what's he like?" Carlos's expression tightened slightly. "Fair. Keeps to himself mostly. Runs a tight ship. Don't expect to see much of him." After the tour, Carlos led her to the stable. The building was large, well ventilated, with stalls for at least 20 horses. At the far end was a small room that might have once been an office. "This is it," Carlos said, pushing open the door. The space was plain: cement floor, a small desk, and a chair. No bed, no amenities. "I'll have Martha bring some blankets," Carlos offered, looking uncomfortable. Livia peered into the room, then at the nearby stalls. Fresh hay was piled high in an empty stall beside a gentle-looking mare. "Actually," she said thoughtfully, "would it be all right if I just used some of that hay? I could make a comfortable spot right there." She pointed to the empty stall. Carlos stared at her. "You want to sleep in the stable with the horses?" "If that's okay. It looks clean and I'd actually prefer it. More space than that little room." After a moment of hesitation, Carlos shrugged. "Your choice. Start tomorrow at 5. Don't be late." When Carlos left, Livia set her backpack down and arranged some hay into a makeshift bed. The horse in the next stall looked at her curiously. "Hi, there," she said softly, reaching out to stroke its muzzle. "Looks like we're neighbors." That night, After a simple dinner in the workers' dining area where she met 5 other ranch hands, none particularly friendly, Livia returned to her spot in the stable. She spread a blanket Martha had reluctantly provided over the hay, creating a surprisingly comfortable bed. The horses made soft, soothing sounds in the darkness. Livia felt an unexpected peace wash over her. She'd slept in far worse places. At least here there was a roof, food, and the promise of honest work. She curled onto her side, pulling the blanket over her shoulders. "Just for now," she whispered, to herself. "Just until something better comes along." Eduardo Montero stood at the window of his study, watching the ranch hands head to their quarters for the night. At 30, he was already a successful rancher, having expanded the operation he inherited from his father into one of the region's most profitable agricultural businesses. Success, however, had done little to fill the emptiness inside him. 5 years had passed since he lost Maria in the car accident, but the pain remained fresh. He'd thrown himself into work, avoiding social events and turning down setups from well-meaning friends. "Sir?" Martha's voice came from the doorway. "I've brought your evening tea. Thank you, Martha." Eduardo turned from the window. "How did the new hire settle in?" Martha placed the teacup on his desk. "That's what I wanted to speak with you about. The girl, Livia. She's sleeping in the stable." "In the hay?" Eduardo frowned. "The stable? Why not the guest room?" Carlos told her about the worker housing being renovated. She insisted she didn't mind. Chose the stable herself. Martha shook her head. "Poor thing doesn't even have proper luggage, just a backpack." Eduardo rubbed his temple. "Is she qualified for the work?" "Carlos says she has some experience." "She seemed eager." Martha hesitated. "She reminds me a bit of you when you were younger, determined." Eduardo picked up his teacup. "Keep an eye on her, Martha. Make sure she has what she needs." After Martha left, Eduardo returned to the window. The stable lights had been dimmed for the night. He tried to focus on the financial reports awaiting his attention, but found his thoughts drifting to the mysterious new worker sleeping in hay. Livia adapted quickly to ranch life. She woke before dawn, helped with milking the cows, fed the horses, and tackled whatever tasks Carlos assigned. The work was hard, but she welcomed the physical exhaustion. It kept her from dwelling on the past. The other workers largely ignored her, occasionally trading whispers when she passed. Only Pedro, an older stable hand, showed her kindness, teaching her little tricks for handling the more temperamental horses. "You have a way with them," Pedro observed on her 4th day. "Especially Thunder." He nodded toward the black stallion that everyone else approached with caution. "Animals know when you respect them," Livia replied simply. Each night she returned to her haybed, increasingly grateful for its unexpected comfort. The horse's presence soothed her, and for the first time in years, she slept without nightmares. Her 5th night at Alto Sky Ranch, Livia was awakened by the stable door opening. She froze, listening to footsteps approaching. Carefully, she peeked over the stall door. A tall man stood in the center aisle, holding a lantern. Even in the dim light, she could tell he was well dressed. Expensive boots, tailored jeans, a crisp shirt. He moved with quiet confidence, stopping to check on each horse. Livia remained still, hoping he wouldn't notice her. When he reached Thunder's stall, the horse greeted him with a soft, nickering sound. "Hey, big guy," the man said, his voice low and gentle. "Behaving yourself?" He stroked Thunder's neck, then continued his rounds. When he reached the stall next to Livia's, she ducked down, but her movement caught his attention. The lantern light swung toward her. "Who's there?" he called. Livia stood slowly, clutching her blanket. "I'm Livia, the new farmhand." The man approached, lifting the lantern to illuminate her face. In its glow, Livia could see him clearly for the first time. He was younger than she expected, maybe 30, with dark hair and serious eyes. Handsome in a way that suggested he didn't think about it much. "You're sleeping here?" he asked, surprise evident in his voice. "The worker housing is being renovated," she explained. "This is comfortable enough." He studied her for a long moment. "In the hay? By choice?" "I've slept." "In worse places," she answered honestly. Something in his expression shifted. He looked at her differently, not with pity, but with a kind of recognition. "I'm Eduardo Montero," he said finally. "This is my ranch." Livia straightened her shoulders. "I hope it's okay. Carlos said—" "It's fine," Eduardo interrupted. "I just wasn't expecting—" He trailed off, then asked, "Are you warm enough? Do you need more blankets?" "I'm fine, really. The hay is surprisingly comfortable and the horses are good company." Eduardo nodded slowly, still watching her with that penetrating gaze. Then, almost to himself, he murmured, "Someone who lies. Down like this on the ground. Must have the entire sky hidden inside." "Excuse me?" Livia asked, not sure she'd heard correctly. "Nothing," Eduardo replied quickly. "Just an old saying my grandfather used to repeat." He backed away. "Good night, Miss Santos." "Good night, Mr. Montero." Eduardo turned to leave, then hesitated. "If you need anything at all, please tell Martha, or come to the house." Before Livia could respond, he was gone, taking the lantern light with him. She settled back, into her haybed, puzzled by the encounter. His words echoed in her mind as she drifted back to sleep. The next morning, Livia was feeding the horses when Martha appeared with a tray. "Morning, dear," Martha said, setting the tray on a nearby shelf. "Brought you some breakfast." Livia looked at the tray in surprise. On it sat a steaming cup of coffee, freshly baked bread, eggs, and fruit, far better than the simple porridge served in the workers' dining area. "This is for me?" she asked. "Mr. Montero's instructions," Martha replied with a small smile. "Said, you should have a proper breakfast if you're handling Thunder. That horse has thrown every hand who's tried to ride him." "Thunder's just misunderstood," Livia said, accepting a cup of coffee gratefully. Martha watched her for a moment. "You know, there's a spare room in the house. Small but proper walls and a real bed." Livia shook her head. "This is fine, really. I don't want special treatment." "Suit yourself," Martha said with a shrug. "But the offer stands." As the days passed, Eduardo began appearing at the stable more frequently, sometimes in the early morning, sometimes late at night. He always had a reason, checking on a horse, reviewing the feeding schedule, inspecting new equipment, but his eyes inevitably found their way to Livia. Their conversations were brief at first. Eduardo would ask about her work, whether she needed anything. Livia would answer politely, always maintaining a respectful distance. She had learned long ago not to get too familiar with employers, but something was changing. Eduardo started bringing her coffee in the mornings. He'd ask which horses she thought needed exercise, valuing her observations. He began lingering longer, telling her about the ranch's history, his plans for expanding the operation. "You have good instincts with the animals," he told her one evening as they brushed Thunder together. "Where did you learn?" "Nowhere specifically," Livia answered. "I've worked different jobs since I was 16, picked things up along the way." "And your family?" Eduardo asked carefully. Livia focused on Thunder's mane. "It's just me." Eduardo didn't press further, but the look in his eyes told her he understood more than she had said. The other ranch hands noticed the attention. Whispers turned into comments just loud enough for Livia to hear. "Pretty convenient, sleeping where the boss takes his midnight walks," one remarked. "Wonder what she did to get special breakfasts," another said with a snicker. Livia ignored them, but the insinuations stung. She had worked hard all her life, never taking shortcuts or handouts. The last thing she wanted was to be seen as trying to catch a wealthy ranch owner. 2 weeks into her stay, Livia returned to the stable after a long day of work to find a small package on her haybed. Wrapped in brown paper was a new blanket, soft, warm, and clearly expensive, with a simple note: "The nights are getting cooler. E." She ran her fingers over the fine fabric, touched by the gesture yet troubled by its implications. If anyone saw this gift, the gossip would only worsen. That night, when Eduardo made his usual visit to the stable, Livia was waiting. She held out the folded blanket. "I can't accept this," she said quietly. Eduardo frowned. "It's just a blanket." "It's more than that, and you know it." Livia kept her voice steady. "People are talking. I don't care what people say." "Well, I do," Livia countered. "I'm here to work, Mr. Montero. I need this job." Eduardo's expression softened. I'm not trying to compromise your position, He paused, clearly struggling with his words. I admire your dignity, your independence. Their eyes met in the dim, stable light. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Eduardo gently pushed the blanket back toward her. Keep it. As your employer, I'm responsible for your well-being, nothing more. Livia hesitated, then nodded. Thank you. As Eduardo turned to leave, he added quietly, And Livia, I've never met anyone like you. She watched him walk away, her heart beating unexpectedly fast. For a woman who'd spent years keeping everyone at a distance, the unfamiliar feeling frightened her more than she cared to admit. Later that night, wrapped in her new blanket, Livia stared at the stable ceiling. She had come here looking only for temporary work, a paycheck and a roof, however unconventional. She hadn't expected to find someone who looked at her like Eduardo did, as if seeing past all her carefully constructed walls. It was dangerous. She knew better than to let herself feel anything for a man so far removed from her world. When her time at Alto Sky Ranch ended, and it would, she would move on, just as she always had. Yet as she drifted off to sleep, Eduardo's words echoed. In her mind, someone who lies down like this on the ground must have the entire sky hidden inside. For the first time in years, Livia allowed herself to wonder if someone might actually see beyond her circumstances, to who she really was beneath it all. 3 weeks had passed since Livia arrived at Alto Sky Ranch. The crisp morning air carried the scent of autumn as she worked in the stable, her movements now confident and familiar. She had settled into a routine, earning respect from even the most skeptical ranch hands through her tireless work ethic and genuine care for the animals. Only Carlos still watched her with suspicion, especially when Eduardo came around, which happened more and more frequently. That stallion's getting too attached to you, Carlos remarked one morning as Livia led Thunder from his stall, just like his owner. Livia pretended not to hear, focusing instead on the magnificent black horse. Thunder had become her special project. Once considered too wild to ride, he now followed her commands with surprising obedience. Let's show them what you can do, she whispered to Thunder, leading him to the training corral. Eduardo was already there, leaning against the fence. He straightened when he saw her approach, a smile spreading across his face. Good morning, he called. Ready for the big test? Today marked an important milestone. If Livia could ride Thunder successfully, it would prove her value to the ranch, beyond temporary help. Eduardo had mentioned the possibility of a permanent position, though Livia had been careful not to get her hopes up. He's ready, she replied, patting Thunder's neck. Several workers had gathered to watch, including Pedro, who gave her an encouraging nod, and Carlos, whose expression remained doubtful. Martha stood beside Eduardo, hands clasped nervously. Livia led Thunder into the corral, speaking softly to him as she prepared the saddle. The horse remained calm under her touch. When everything was secure, she took a deep breath and mounted in one smooth motion. For a moment, Thunder stood perfectly still. Then, as if testing her, he gave a small buck. Livia held firm, her hand steady on the reins. Another buck, stronger this time. Several onlookers gasped. Easy, boy, Livia murmured. I'm right here with you. Gradually, Thunder settled. Livia guided him into a walk around the corral, then a trot. His movements were powerful but controlled. Finally, with a gentle nudge, she urged him into a gallop. They circled the corral once, twice, 3 times, horse and rider moving as one. Thunder responded to the slightest pressure from her legs, the smallest adjustment of the reins. It was a flawless demonstration. When Livia finally brought Thunder to a stop in the center of the corral, applause erupted from the small crowd. Even Carlos looked impressed. Eduardo approached, his eyes shining with admiration. That was remarkable, he said. I've never seen anyone handle him so well. Thunder just needed someone to believe in him, Livia replied, dismounting gracefully. You've accomplished in 3 weeks what professional trainers couldn't do in months. Eduardo's voice carried genuine respect. I think this calls for a celebration. Before Livia could respond, Martha stepped forward. I've prepared a special lunch. At the main house, she announced. Everyone's invited. Livia hesitated. She had never been inside the main house, deliberately keeping her distance from Eduardo's personal space, but refusing now would seem ungrateful. "I should get Thunder settled first," she said. "I'll help," Eduardo offered. Together they led Thunder back to the stable. As they removed his saddle and brushed him down, Eduardo spoke quietly. "You know, I've been thinking about your situation." Livia tensed. "My situation? The worker housing will be ready next week, but I had another thought." Eduardo seemed unusually nervous. "There's a small cottage near the south pasture. It was the original caretaker's house. No one uses it now, but it's in good condition. Private." Livia brushed Thunder's mane, considering this offer. "That sounds nice. But I'm just temporary. Help. I wouldn't want to impose." "You're more than temporary," Eduardo said firmly. "I'd like you to stay on, work with the horses permanently. You have a gift." The offer caught Livia off guard. A permanent position, a real house. After years of drifting from job to job, the stability was tempting, dangerously so. "Can I think about it?" she asked. Eduardo nodded. "Of course. Now let's go celebrate your success." The main house was even more impressive up close, a beautiful blend of rustic charm and understated luxury. Inside, Martha had transformed the dining room with a festive spread. The ranch hands filled their plates eagerly, the mood light and celebratory. Livia stayed close to Pedro, uncomfortable with being the center of attention. She noticed Eduardo watching her from across the room, his gaze warm and intent. "The boss has taken quite a shine to you," Pedro remarked, following her gaze. "He's just impressed with Thunder's progress," Livia deflected. Pedro chuckled. "My dear, I've known Eduardo since he was a boy. I haven't seen him look at anyone that way since Maria." "Maria?" Livia couldn't help asking. Pedro's expression turned solemn. "His fiancée died in a car accident 5 years ago. He hasn't been the same since." He patted Livia's hand. "Until now." The information settled heavily in Livia's chest. So, Eduardo had suffered his own loss. Perhaps that explained the sadness she sometimes glimpsed behind his smile. As the celebration continued, 2 elegantly dressed women arrived, unexpected visitors who immediately drew attention. The older woman embraced Eduardo with familiar affection, while the younger one, strikingly beautiful in designer clothes, kissed his cheek with obvious intimacy. "Who are they?" Livia asked Martha, who was refreshing the food table. "Mrs. Oliveira and her daughter Isabella," Martha explained. "Family friends. Mrs. Oliveira was Eduardo's mother's best friend. And Isabella," Livia kept her voice casual. Martha lowered her voice. "Everyone expected them to get engaged before—" She trailed off. "Well, they still move in the same social circles. Mrs. Oliveira never gave up hope they'd reconcile." Livia watched as Isabella linked her arm through Eduardo's, leaning close to whisper something in his ear. They looked right together. Both wealthy, polished, from the same world. "I should get back to work," Livia said suddenly, setting down her barely touched plate. "But it's your celebration," Martha protested. "I've celebrated enough," Livia insisted. "Thank you for everything." She slipped out quietly, hurrying back to the stable, where she felt most comfortable. The horses greeted her with familiar nickering sounds, and she busied herself with afternoon feeding, grateful for the simple, honest work. An hour later, she heard footsteps approaching. Looking up, she saw Eduardo. "You left early," he said, his tone gentle but questioning. "There's still work to be done," Livia answered, not meeting his eyes. Eduardo moved closer. "The work can wait. Today was supposed to be about celebrating your achievement. It was a lovely party, thank you." Livia continued measuring grain for the horse's feed, "but something upset you." It wasn't a question. Livia finally looked at him. "Your friends seemed surprised to find you celebrating with the ranch hands." Isabella and her mother dropped by unannounced. "They don't dictate what I do on my own property." "Of course not." Livia returned to her task. "They seem very fond of you." Eduardo sighed, leaning against a post. "Mrs. Oliveira was like a second mother to me after my parents died. She has expectations. And Isabella? An old friend. Nothing more." Eduardo studied her face. "Is that what bothered you? Isabella?" "Why would that bother me?" Livia asked too quickly. Your personal life is none of my business, Mr. Montero. We're back to Mr. Montero now. A hint of frustration colored his voice. I thought we'd moved past formalities. Formalities exist for a reason, Livia replied quietly. They keep things clear, appropriate. Eduardo stepped closer, his presence filling the narrow stable aisle. And what would be inappropriate, Livia? Her heart quickened at his proximity. You know very well. Tell me anyway. Livia put down the feed scoop, facing him directly. You're the owner, I work for you. That's the beginning and end of our relationship. Is that all you want it to be? Eduardo's voice had dropped to nearly a whisper. For a moment, neither spoke. The tension between them was palpable, filled with unspoken feelings. What I want doesn't matter, Livia finally said. I've learned not to want things I can't have. Eduardo's expression softened. What if you could have it? Before she could answer, voices approached. Isabella and her mother being given a tour of the stables by Carlos. Eduardo stepped back, the moment broken. Eduardo, darling, there you are, Mrs. Oliveira called. We wondered where you'd disappeared. To Isabella's eyes narrowed slightly as she took in the scene, Eduardo standing close to Livia in the narrow stable aisle. Mother wanted to see the new stallion everyone's talking about, Isabella explained smoothly, moving to Eduardo's side. Carlos tells us this young lady has worked wonders with him. Livia nodded politely. Thunder just needed patience. How fascinating, Isabella replied without interest. Eduardo, don't forget the Anderson Charity Gala next weekend. You promised to escort me, did I? Eduardo's tone was non-committal. Of course you did, dear, Mrs. Oliveira interjected. It's the social event of the season. Everyone will be there. Eduardo glanced at Livia, who had returned to measuring feed, her face carefully blank. We'll discuss it later, he told Isabella. Right now I have ranch business to attend to. After they departed, an uncomfortable silence fell over the stable. Livia worked methodically, aware of Eduardo watching her. It's not what it looked like, he said eventually. It's exactly what it looked like, Livia corrected him gently. Your world, Eduardo, the one you belong in. I don't feel like I belong there anymore. Perhaps not. But it's still your reality. Livia finished with the feed, wiping her hands. On her jeans. Thank you again for the celebration and for your offer. I'll let you know about the cottage. Eduardo looked like he wanted to say more, but simply nodded and left her to her work. That night Livia lay awake in her bed of hay, thoughts tumbling through her mind. The offer of a permanent position and the cottage was everything she should want: stability, decent work, a place of her own. Yet she felt an inexplicable urge to run, to protect herself from whatever was developing between her and Eduardo. She had spent years building walls, learning not to trust the kindness of others. Eduardo seemed sincere, but she had been wrong before at great cost. Sleep finally claimed her, but her dreams were troubled by images of Isabella's knowing smirk and Eduardo's questioning eyes. The next few days brought a subtle shift in the ranch's atmosphere. Eduardo was frequently away on business, and when present seemed distracted. Livia threw herself into her work, spending extra hours with Thunder and the other horses, avoiding the main house entirely. Carlos, sensing the change dynamic, became bolder in his disapproval. Boss is returning to his senses, he remarked as Livia cleaned tack in the equipment room. That Isabella, she's the right kind of woman for a man like him. Same background, understands his position. Livia said nothing, polishing a bridle with more vigor than necessary. Worker housing is ready now, Carlos continued. You'll be moving your things tomorrow. Fine, Livia said simply, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her disappointment. Unless you'd rather take that cottage. Offer, Carlos added with a knowing look. Quite generous of the boss, offering private housing to a temporary hand. Makes a person wonder what kind of services might be expected in return. Livia's hand stopped moving. She looked up slowly, meeting Carlos's insinuating gaze with cold dignity. I've earned my place here through hard work, she said evenly. Unlike some people who seem to spend more time gossiping than working. Carlos's face darkened. Watch yourself, girl. Pretty faces come and go around here. Don't get too comfortable." After he left, Livia sat motionless, a familiar heaviness settling in her chest. This was why she never stayed in one place too long. People always found ways to turn kindness into something ugly. That evening, as she prepared for her nightly routine in the stable, Martha appeared with a message. Eduardo wanted to see her in his office at the main house. Immediately, the walk to the main house felt longer than usual. Livia wondered what awaited her. Had Carlos reported their exchange? Was Eduardo rescinding his offer of permanent employment? Eduardo's office reflected his personality, organized, tasteful, with personal touches that spoke of his passion for the ranch. He stood when she entered, gesturing for her to take a seat across from his desk. "Thank you for coming," he began formally. "I wanted to discuss your future at Alto Sky." "Has there been a complaint about my work?" Livia asked directly. Eduardo looked surprised. "Not at all. Quite the opposite. You've proven yourself invaluable, especially with Thunder." Relief washed over her, followed quickly by confusion. "Then why—" "I've been thinking about my offer," Eduardo interrupted. "The cottage by the south pasture." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I realize now it might have appeared improper." Livia's heart sank. "I see. Not because there was anything wrong with the offer itself," he clarified quickly, "but because of how others might perceive it, how they might treat you because of it." "You've heard the gossip," Livia guessed. Eduardo nodded grimly. "Carlos took it upon himself to express concerns about our professional relationship." "Carlos should mind his own business," Livia said, anger flaring. "I agree, and I've made that very clear to him." Eduardo leaned forward. "But I don't want to make things difficult for you, so I've made arrangements for you to have private quarters in the newly renovated worker housing, better than the others. Your own entrance and—" he smiled slightly, "a proper bed." The consideration behind his decision touched her. He was trying to protect her reputation while still offering her better accommodations. "Thank you," she said softly. "That's very thoughtful." "I want you to stay, Livia." His eyes held hers. "But I want you to be comfortable, respected. And the permanent position? Still yours, if you want it. Head trainer for the equestrian program I'm developing." It was more than she had dared. Hope for meaningful work she excelled at. Decent housing. A chance to build something stable. Yet beneath her gratitude lay a whisper of disappointment. Eduardo was doing the right thing, creating appropriate boundaries between them. It was what she had asked for in so many words. "I accept," she said finally, "both the position and the housing." Eduardo smiled, though something like regret flickered in his eyes. "Excellent. You can move your things tomorrow. Martha will help you get settled." Livia stood to leave, but hesitated at the door. "Eduardo." "Yes? Thank you for seeing me as capable, not just—" She trailed off, unable to express exactly what she meant. Eduardo rose from his desk. "I see you clearly, Livia. More clearly than perhaps you realize." Their eyes held for a long moment, filled with things neither dared to say aloud. Then Livia nodded and slipped out, closing the door softly behind her. That night, her last in the stable, Livia carefully folded the blanket Eduardo had given her. She would take it to her new quarters, a small reminder of unexpected kindness. As she prepared her hay bed one final time, she felt a strange reluctance to leave this simple place where, against all odds, she had found a measure of peace. "Just one more night," she whispered to Thunder, who watched her from his stall. "Then it's a real bed for me, no more hay." She settled in, pulling the blanket up to her chin. Tomorrow would bring changes, good ones, practical ones. Yet as she drifted towards sleep, Livia couldn't help wondering if, in gaining stability and respect, she might be losing something precious that had barely begun to bloom. In the darkness of the stable, surrounded by the gentle sounds of horses, she allowed herself one moment of complete honesty. She'd begun to care for Eduardo in ways that went far beyond employee and employer. And while her head told her to maintain distance, her heart whispered something else entirely. "Just dreams," she murmured to herself. "That's all they can ever be." Outside, rain began to fall softly, drumming against the stable roof. Livia closed her eyes, letting the rhythm lull her to sleep. Whatever tomorrow brought, she would face it with the same quiet dignity that had carried her through so much already. Some doors were simply not meant for people like her to walk through, no matter how much she might wish otherwise. The new workers' quarters were clean, private, and comfortable. Everything Livia's stable bed wasn't. She had her own small bathroom, a dresser for her few belongings, and a window overlooking the eastern pasture where horses grazed in the morning light. Yet, after a week in her new accommodations, Livia still felt strangely unsettled. The soft mattress felt too yielding after weeks on firm hay. The silence seemed empty, without the gentle sounds of horses nearby. Most unsettling of all was how rarely she saw Eduardo now. Her new position as head trainer kept her busy from dawn until dusk. Eduardo had given her full responsibility for the equestrian program, including selecting horses for training, designing exercise regimens, and eventually teaching riding lessons to clients. It was challenging work that she loved, but it kept her far from the main operations of the ranch, and from Eduardo himself. "He's giving you space to establish yourself," Martha explained one afternoon when she brought lunch to the training area. "Wants the other workers to respect you for your own merit, not see you as getting special treatment." "I don't need special treatment," Livia replied, wiping sweat from her brow. She had just finished a vigorous training session with Thunder, who continued to make remarkable progress. Martha set the lunch basket on a bench. "No, but you deserve recognition. That's why he's invited you to the ranch dinner this Saturday." "Ranch dinner?" Livia asked, accepting a sandwich gratefully. Monthly tradition. Eduardo hosts all the management staff for dinner at the main house. "Now that you're head trainer, you're included," Livia chewed thoughtfully. The idea of a formal dinner with the ranch's management made her nervous. These were people with education, experience, proper backgrounds. Meanwhile, she had spent her adult life drifting from job to job, with no family connections or professional credentials. "I don't think I have anything appropriate to wear," she admitted. Martha smiled. "I thought you might say that. There's a dress in your room. Nothing fancy, just simple and nice. Eduardo had me pick it up from town. He bought me a dress?" Livia frowned. No, just asked me to find something suitable and put it on the ranch account. It's a business expense, not a personal gift." Martha's eyes twinkled knowingly. Though between us, he was quite specific about the color. Said blue would match your eyes. Livia felt heat rise to her cheeks. That was thoughtful. Martha hummed, gathering the lunch basket. "Dinner's at 7, don't be late." After Martha left, Livia leaned against the corral fence, lost in thought. Every time she tried to establish professional distance from Eduardo, something pulled them back together. It would be so much easier if he were just her boss, not this complex man who noticed the color of her eyes and still kept a respectful distance. When Saturday evening arrived, Livia stood nervously before the small mirror in her room. The dress Martha had selected was indeed simple. A knee-length wrap dress in deep blue, with three-quarter sleeves and a modest neckline. Yet Livia barely recognized herself in it. After weeks in jeans and work shirts, the feminine silhouette felt foreign. She had washed her hair and let it fall loose around her shoulders instead of in her usual practical braid. With no makeup and only a pair of basic flats to complete the outfit, she was far from glamorous. But it was the most dressed up she'd been in years. Just a business dinner, she reminded her reflection. Nothing more. The main house was warmly lit as Livia approached. Through the windows, she could see people already gathered in the dining room. Carlos and his wife, Pedro, the farm manager, the accountant, and a few others she recognized from around the ranch. Taking a deep breath, she knocked on the door. Martha opened it with a welcoming smile. "Right on time. Come in, dear." Conversation paused momentarily as Livia entered the dining room. She felt several pairs of eyes assessing her transformed appearance, but it was Eduardo's gaze that made her pulse quicken. He stood at the head of the table, handsome in a blue button-down shirt and dark slacks. For a brief moment, their eyes met across the room, and something warm and appreciative flashed in his expression. "Livia, welcome," he said, gesturing to an empty chair. "We were just about to begin." To her surprise, the empty seat was near Eduardo's end of the table, a position of honor. Carlos raised an eyebrow, but said nothing as she took her seat. The dinner was far less intimidating than Livia had feared. Eduardo led the conversation skillfully, ensuring everyone participated in discussions about the ranch's operations. When the topic turned to the new equestrian program, he deferred to Livia, giving her an opportunity to share her vision. "We'll start with intermediate riders," she explained, warming to the subject. "Focus on proper technique and horse management, not just recreational riding. Eventually we could expand to competitive training." "Ambitious," Carlos remarked, a hint of skepticism in his voice. "Precisely what we need," Eduardo countered smoothly. "Livia's experience with Thunder has proven she has exceptional insight into horse psychology. Her program will set our ranch apart." The confidence in his voice bolstered Livia's courage. She outlined more of her ideas, and soon even Carlos was reluctantly contributing suggestions. As the evening progressed, Livia found herself relaxing. These people weren't so different from her, after all. They cared about their work, took pride in the ranch's success, and respected competence regardless of background. After dessert, Eduardo suggested moving to the living room for coffee. As people began to rise from the table, the doorbell rang. Martha went to answer it, returning with a troubled expression. "Mr. Montero, Miss Isabella and her mother are here." A flash of annoyance crossed Eduardo's face, quickly replaced by his usual composed expression. "Show them in, please." Isabella entered like a perfectly timed storm, beautiful, attention-commanding, and disruptive. She wore an elegant cocktail dress that made Livia's simple attire look painfully plain by comparison. Mrs. Oliveira followed, equally well-dressed, both women looking surprised to find a dinner party in progress. "Eduardo, darling," Isabella exclaimed. "We were in the area and thought we'd stop by. We had no idea you were entertaining." "Monthly management dinner," Eduardo explained, his tone polite but reserved. Isabella's gaze swept over the assembled ranch staff, lingering on Livia, with barely concealed appraisal. "How quaint. We won't intrude." Despite her words, she made no move to leave. Eduardo, ever the gracious host, invited them to join for coffee. Mrs. Oliveira accepted immediately, while Isabella moved to Eduardo's side, linking her arm through his with practiced familiarity. "Eduardo was just telling us about Miss Santos's new equestrian program," Pedro said, clearly attempting to include Livia in the conversation. "Oh?" Isabella's smile didn't reach her eyes. "How fascinating. Do you compete, Miss Santos?" "No," Livia answered simply. "I focus on training horses and riders." "Livia has a remarkable gift," Eduardo interjected. "She's accomplished more with our stallion in a month than professional trainers did in a year." Isabella laughed lightly. "Eduardo exaggerates. He's always had a soft spot for underdogs." The subtle dig wasn't lost on anyone. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. "Perhaps you'd like to see Thunder in action," Livia suggested, maintaining her composure. "We could arrange a demonstration next week." "That would be lovely," Mrs. Oliveira replied, before Isabella could refuse. "Eduardo, remember how you used to ride competitively? Such a shame you gave it up after the accident." Eduardo tensed slightly. "I found other priorities." "Speaking of priorities," Isabella cut in smoothly, "I've finalized arrangements for the medical center fundraiser. The committee is thrilled you've agreed to be a major donor." This was clearly news to Eduardo, whose expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "We should discuss that privately." "Of course, darling." Isabella smiled triumphantly. Livia felt increasingly out of place as the conversation shifted to charity events, social commitments, and people she'd never heard of. One by one, the ranch staff made excuses to leave, until only Livia, Eduardo, Isabella, and Mrs. Oliveira remained. "I should be going too," Livia said quietly, rising from her seat. "Early training tomorrow." Eduardo looked like he wanted to ask her to stay, but simply nodded. "Thank you for coming, Livia. Your insights were valuable." "Always so formal, Eduardo," Isabella teased after Livia had said her goodbyes. "She works for you, not the other way around." Livia pretended not to hear as she collected her sweater from the coat rack. Martha appeared from the kitchen, offering to walk her out. "Don't let them bother you," Martha murmured as they stepped onto the porch. Isabella's always been possessive, even when Eduardo made it clear they were just friends. It's none of my business, Livia replied. Though the knot in her stomach suggested otherwise, Martha gave her a knowing look. Isn't it? Before Livia could respond, the front door opened and Eduardo stepped out. Martha, could you bring more coffee for our guests? He asked, though his eyes were on Livia. Of course, Martha replied, giving Livia's hand a quick squeeze, before heading back inside. For a moment, they stood alone in the cool night air. Eduardo stepped closer, his expression apologetic. Isabella has a talent for unexpected appearances, he said. I'm sorry if she made you uncomfortable. She didn't, Livia lied, but I appreciate the concern. Eduardo studied her face. You look beautiful tonight. That color suits you. The compliment caught her off guard. Thank you for the dress. It wasn't necessary. It was the least I could do. He paused, then added, I've missed our conversations these past weeks. Livia's heart quickened. You've been busy, and I've had my hands full with the program. Too busy, he agreed. Would you join me for breakfast tomorrow? At the cottage by the south pasture, I'd like to discuss your progress with Thunder away from interruptions. The invitation seemed innocent enough, a business meeting in a private location, yet something in his voice suggested more. I should be finished with morning feeding by 8, Livia said carefully. Eduardo smiled. 8 it is. I'll bring breakfast. Inside the house, Isabella's laughter drifted through an open window, elegant, confident, a reminder of the world Eduardo belonged to. Your guests are waiting, Livia said softly. They're not my guests. They invited themselves. Eduardo's tone held a hint of frustration. Isabella has been a friend since childhood. Our families always assumed we'd end up together. Then I met Maria, and everything changed. It was the first time he'd mentioned his late fiancée directly to Livia. Pedro told me about her, Livia admitted. I'm sorry for your loss. Eduardo nodded, his eyes reflecting old pain. After Maria died, I shut down. Isabella and her mother took it upon themselves to bring me back to society. They mean well, but you weren't ready, Livia finished for him. I wasn't interested, he corrected, until recently. The implication hung in the air between them, charged with possibility. Eduardo? Isabella's voice called from inside. Where did you disappear to? 8 o'clock, Livia reminded him quickly, turning to leave. Livia, Eduardo called after her, don't let Isabella intimidate you. You belong here as much as anyone. His words followed her all the way back to her quarters, a small flame of hope she was afraid to nurture. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Livia rose early, completed her chores with unusual haste, and changed into fresh clothes before heading to the cottage. She had passed it many times during rides, but had never been inside. The small stone building sat nestled among old oak trees, overlooking a scenic section of the south pasture. A stream ran nearby, its gentle sound creating a peaceful atmosphere. A thin curl of smoke rose from the chimney, indicating Eduardo had already arrived. Livia hesitated at the door, suddenly nervous. Was she crossing a line by meeting him here alone? Before she could reconsider, Eduardo opened the door. I thought I heard someone, he said, smiling. Come in. The cottage interior was simple but charming, a main room with comfortable furniture, a small kitchen, and doors leading to what she assumed were a bedroom and bathroom. A table near the window was set for breakfast with fresh fruit, pastries, and coffee. This is lovely, Livia remarked, taking in the peaceful space. It was my grandfather's retreat. He built it himself when he first started the ranch. Eduardo gestured to the table. Hungry? They settled into an easy conversation as they ate, discussing Thunder's progress, plans for the equestrian program, and improvements to the training facilities. It felt like their talks in the stable, natural, unforced. I've been thinking about expanding your role, Eduardo said, as they finished their coffee. The program needs someone with your insight full-time, not just training horses, but developing the entire equestrian center. Livia blinked in surprise. That's a big responsibility, one you're more than capable of handling. His confidence in her was unwavering. It would mean a significant raise, of course, and he hesitated. This cottage would be yours. Livia looked around the cozy space, trying to imagine calling it home. Eduardo, this is too much. It's not charity if that's what you're worried about. It's a business decision. His eyes held hers. The best person for the job should have appropriate compensation. And appropriate housing? Livia questioned gently. Eduardo leaned back in his chair. The cottage comes with the position. It always has. He gestured around them. My grandfather lived here when he managed the ranch. My father did too before he built the main house. It's tradition. The offer was tempting. Meaningful work, fair pay, a beautiful place to live. Everything Livia had ever wanted for herself, presented without strings or expectations. May I think about it, she asked. Of course. Eduardo stood, gathering their empty plates. No rush. As he moved to the kitchen, Livia noticed a photograph on the mantel she hadn't seen before, a younger Eduardo with a beautiful young woman, both smiling, her hand displaying an engagement ring. Is this Maria? She asked softly. Eduardo paused, then nodded. Yes, that was the day I proposed. Livia studied the photo. The woman had been stunning, elegant, refined, clearly from Eduardo's social circle, yet there was something warm and unpretentious about her smile. She was beautiful. She was kind, Eduardo said, coming to stand beside her. That's what I remember most, her kindness. Their shoulders nearly touched as they both gazed at the photograph. Livia could feel the heat of him beside her, so close yet separated by invisible barriers. His past, their different worlds, her own fear of hoping for too much. What happened? She asked quietly. If you don't mind telling me. Eduardo was silent for a long moment. Drunk driver. Wrong place, wrong time. His voice was steady but pained. We were on our way to look at wedding venues. Livia instinctively reached for his hand, covering it with her own. I'm so sorry. Eduardo turned his palm up, his fingers closing around hers. For a long time, I couldn't imagine feeling anything again. I went through the motions, ran the ranch, attended necessary functions, but inside I was empty. Their hands remained joined, a simple connection that felt more intimate than any words. And now? Livia hardly dared to ask. Eduardo turned to face her fully. Now I find myself thinking about the future again, wanting things I'd given up on. The intensity of his gaze made her heart race. For once, Livia didn't look away or try to create distance. She allowed herself to acknowledge what had been growing between them since that first night in the stable. Eduardo, she began, not sure what she wanted to say. The moment was shattered by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. They stepped apart as Carlos appeared at the cottage door, his expression grim. Sorry to interrupt, boss, but there's trouble. Isabella's horse got spooked during her morning ride. She's fallen in the north pasture. Eduardo immediately switched to crisis mode. Is she hurt? Shaken up, maybe a sprained ankle. Her mother's with her. They're waiting for you to come. Eduardo grabbed his jacket. I'll be right there. He turned to Livia. I'm sorry about this. Go, she urged. We can talk later. She watched from the cottage door as Eduardo rode away with Carlos, their moment of connection already fading like morning mist. With a sigh, Livia began clearing the breakfast dishes, trying not to think about what might have happened if they hadn't been interrupted. As she wiped down the table, she noticed a leather-bound book that had been underneath Eduardo's jacket. It lay open to a page filled with handwritten notes. Livia knew she shouldn't look, but a phrase caught her eye. Someone who lies down like this on the ground must have the entire sky hidden inside. It was the same phrase Eduardo had murmured that first night he found her in the stable. Curious, she glanced at the open page. It appeared to be a journal entry, dated shortly after their first meeting. Found. A young woman sleeping in the stable tonight. Livia Santos. There's something about her, a quiet dignity despite her circumstances. Grandfather used to say, someone who lies down like this on the ground must have the entire sky hidden inside. I never understood until now. She reminds me that there's more to people than what's visible on the surface. For the first time in years, I'm curious. I want to know her story. Livia closed the book quickly, feeling like an intruder. She hadn't realized she had made such an impression on him from the beginning. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. Eduardo saw something in her that she had stopped seeing in herself long ago. Possibility. She finished cleaning, then locked the cottage and headed back to the training area, her mind swirling with conflicting emotions. By midday, word had spread throughout the ranch. Isabella had suffered a mild sprain and was resting at the main house, attended by a doctor Eduardo had called. More telling was the rumor that she had refused to return to her own home, insisting on recovering at Alto Sky Ranch, where Eduardo could personally care for her. Livia tried to focus on her work, but Eduardo's absence and the thought of him tending to Isabella gnawed at her. Was she foolish to think there could ever be anything between them? Isabella fit so perfectly into his world, the charity events, the social obligations, the shared history. "Don't let it get to you," Pedro advised when he found her aggressively mucking out stalls that afternoon. "Isabella has always known how to play the damsel in distress. Doesn't mean Eduardo is falling for it." "It's none of my business," Livia insisted, though the force with which she drove her pitchfork into the hay suggested otherwise. Pedro leaned on his rake. "You know, when Eduardo's grandfather built that cottage, he said it was for the person who would help carry on his legacy. Not just anyone gets offered that place." His eyes twinkled knowingly. "Eduardo doesn't make such offers lightly." Before Livia could respond, Martha appeared at the stable entrance, her expression troubled. "Livia, dear, could you come to the house? There's been a situation." "What kind of situation?" Livia set down her pitchfork. Martha sighed. "Isabella's mother was looking for extra pillows and found the dress I got for you in Eduardo's study. He had asked me to have it altered. Now there's quite a scene." Livia's stomach dropped. "I don't want to get involved in their drama." "I know. But Eduardo asked for you specifically." Martha lowered her voice. "I think he needs the moral support." Reluctantly, Livia cleaned up and followed Martha to the main house. As they approached, raised voices could be heard from inside, Mrs. Oliveira's, shrill tones contrasting with Eduardo's measured responses. "Absolutely inappropriate. Buying clothing for an employee. What will people think? Isabella has been nothing but patient with your eccentricities since Maria's death, but this is beyond acceptable." "Mrs. Oliveira," Eduardo's voice was firm, "I've explained that the dress was a business expense for a management dinner. As for what people think, I stopped concerning myself with that years ago." Livia hesitated on the porch, not wanting to walk into the middle of the argument. Martha gave her an encouraging nod. "I'll just tell them you're here," she whispered, slipping inside. A moment later, Eduardo appeared at the door, relief washing over his features at the sight of Livia. "Thank you for coming," he said softly. "Maybe this isn't a good time," Livia suggested. "It's exactly the right time." Eduardo stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind him. "Isabella and her mother seem to have forgotten they're guests in my home, not arbiters of my personal decisions." Livia shifted uncomfortably. "I don't want to cause problems for you." "You're not causing anything." Eduardo ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "They are. Using a minor fall to insert themselves into my life, questioning my business decisions, making assumptions." "What kind of assumptions?" Livia asked quietly. Eduardo's expression softened as he looked at her. "The kind that would be true if I were honest with myself. And with you." Livia's heart stuttered. Before she could respond, the door opened and Isabella appeared, leaning dramatically on a cane, though her injury was reportedly minor. "Eduardo, darling, the doctor says I shouldn't put any weight on." She stopped abruptly at the sight of Livia. "Oh, you called the horse trainer?" The disdain in her voice was unmistakable. Eduardo straightened, something hardening in his expression. "Isabella, I think it's time you and your mother returned home. I'll have Carlos drive you." Isabella's facade of helplessness dropped instantly. "You're choosing her over me? Over us?" Her voice rose. "Eduardo, think about what you're doing. What would Maria say if she could see you now throwing away everything for some drifter who sleeps in stables?" The cruel words hung in the air. Livia felt as if she'd been slapped. Without a word, she turned and walked away, ignoring Eduardo calling her name. She walked blindly, not caring where she was going, just needing to escape the humiliation. Isabella's words had cut straight to Livia's deepest insecurity, that no matter how hard she worked, how much she achieved, she would always be seen as less than, as unworthy. Eventually, she found herself at the far edge of the property, near a small pond surrounded by willows. The peaceful spot seemed to mock her turmoil. Sinking onto a fallen log, Livia let the tears come, tears of anger, embarrassment, and heartache. She had allowed herself to hope, to imagine a future at Alto Sky, perhaps even a future with Eduardo. Now the fantasy lay shattered by the harsh reality Isabella had thrown in her face. What could Eduardo possibly see in her that would make him choose her over someone like Isabella, who matched him in every way that mattered in his world? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the pond, Livia made her decision. She would finish out the month, train her replacement, and then move on, just as she always had when a situation became too complicated or painful. It was better this way, before her heart became even more involved. With new resolve, she dried her tears and headed back toward her quarters. Tomorrow she would speak with Eduardo, thank him for the opportunity, and politely decline his offer of the cottage and expanded role. It was the sensible thing to do, but as she approached the worker housing, she saw a figure sitting on the steps of her unit, Eduardo, waiting in the gathering darkness, his face etched with concern, and something else she was afraid to name. "Livia," he said, rising as she approached, "please let me explain." She stopped a few feet away, maintaining a safe distance. "There's nothing to explain. Isabella made things perfectly clear." "No, she didn't." Eduardo took a step toward her. "She doesn't speak for me, she never has. She's right though, isn't she?" Livia countered. "I don't belong in your world, I never will." Eduardo closed the distance between them, his gaze intense. "Then maybe it's time I found a new world, one where the people I care about are valued for who they are, not where they came from or who their family is." "Eduardo, no, please listen." He took her hands in his. "I've spent 5 years grieving not just Maria, but the person I was with her, alive, hopeful, looking toward the future. I thought that part of me died with her." Livia felt her resolve weakening under the sincerity in his eyes. "Then I found you," Eduardo continued, his voice gentle. "Sleeping in hay, asking for nothing, giving everything to your work, and something woke up inside me, something I thought was gone forever." "What are you saying?" Livia whispered. Eduardo's hands tightened around hers. "I'm saying Isabella and her mother have left. I'm saying I told them never to speak about you that way again. I'm saying I choose you, Livia, if you'll have me." The world seemed to still around them, time suspended in the space between his words and her response. In Eduardo's eyes, Livia saw no pity, no charity, only genuine feeling, vulnerable and true. "I'm afraid," she admitted softly. "Afraid that one day you'll realize I don't fit into your life, that I'm not enough." Eduardo released one of her hands to gently tilt her chin up. "You're more than enough. You always have been. The question is whether I'm worthy of you." As the last light faded from the sky, they stood together at a crossroads, each with fears to overcome, trust to build, and a chance at something neither had dared to hope for. The choice now was Livia's, and the weight of it terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. "Are you asking me to stay?" Livia's voice was barely above a whisper, her heart pounding in her chest as Eduardo's words hung in the twilight air between them. "I'm asking for much more than that," Eduardo replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm asking you to believe that what we feel for each other matters more than where we came from or what others think. I'm asking you to trust me, Livia. Trust. Such a simple word, yet so difficult for someone who had learned again and again that trust led to disappointment." Livia stood at the edge of a cliff, knowing that stepping forward meant risking everything. Her independence, her carefully guarded heart, the walls she'd built to protect herself. "I'm scared," she admitted, the words catching in her throat. Eduardo's expression softened. "So am I, but I'm more afraid of letting you walk away without telling you what's in my heart." He took a deep breath as if gathering courage. "When Maria died, I thought I'd never feel anything again. I went through the motions of living without really being alive. Then you appeared sleeping in hay, asking for nothing but the chance to work hard and be treated with respect." You reminded me what real strength looks like." A tear slipped down Livia's cheek, which Eduardo gently brushed. Away with his thumb. "You don't have to answer now," he said softly. "Take all the time you need. The cottage is yours either way, as head of the equestrian program or—" He hesitated. "As whatever you choose to be in my life." Livia looked into his eyes and saw no deception there, no hidden agenda, only genuine emotion and the same vulnerability she felt. For the first time in her life, someone was seeing her, truly seeing her, and still choosing her. "I need a little time," she said finally. "This is all happening so fast." Eduardo nodded, stepping back respectfully. "Of course, I understand." "But, Eduardo," Livia added, finding her voice, "I'm not going anywhere. Not yet." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise after the longest night. "That's all I can ask for." He walked her to her door, their hands brushing but not quite holding. At the threshold, he stopped, maintaining the space she needed. "Good night, Livia." "Good night, Eduardo." As the door closed between them, Livia leaned against it, her emotions in turmoil. Part of her wanted to fling it open again, to run into his arms and accept everything he offered. But the cautious part, the part that had protected her through years of disappointment, held her back. She needed to be sure not just of his feelings, but of her own strength. If she chose this path, she needed to walk it as his equal, not as someone grateful for his rescue. The next few days passed in a blur of work and quiet contemplation. Eduardo respected her need for space, focusing on ranch business while Livia threw herself into developing the equestrian program. They saw each other at a distance, exchanged polite greetings during chance encounters, but the unresolved question remained between them. Martha, observant as always, found Livia in the tack room one afternoon, meticulously cleaning saddles. "You're going to wear the leather right off if you keep at it like that," she remarked. Livia smiled weakly. "Just being thorough." Martha settled onto a nearby stool. "He's miserable, you know. Trying to hide it, of course. Men always do. But I've known Eduardo since he was a boy. He's walking around like a man waiting for a verdict. I'm not trying to make him suffer," Livia said quietly. "I just need to be sure." "Of him or yourself?" Livia set down the saddle soap. "Both, I guess. What if we try and it doesn't work? What if he wakes up one day and realizes I don't fit into his world?" Martha's expression softened. "Oh, my dear, don't you see? You've already changed his world. Before you came, this place was just a business to him. Now it's a home again. What about Isabella? His social obligations? The people who've known him his whole life?" "Eduardo has never cared much for society's expectations," Martha replied. "That was Maria's world more than his. He went along with it to please her." She reached over to pat Livia's hand. "Besides, he's not asking you to become someone else. He loves who you are right now." The word love made Livia's heart skip. Neither she nor Eduardo had used it yet, though it hovered unspoken in their every interaction. "How do you know?" Livia asked softly. Martha smiled. "Because I've seen how he looks at you when you're working with the horses, like you're the most fascinating person he's ever known. And I see how you look at him when you think no one's watching. That's not gratitude or infatuation, Livia. That's the real thing." As Martha left, her words echoed in Livia's mind. Was it really that simple? Could she trust her heart after guarding it for so long? That evening, as Livia finished her dinner in the workers' dining area, Pedro joined her with a strange request. "Eduardo asked if you could meet him at the stables. Thunder seems agitated, won't let anyone near him." Livia frowned. "Is he sick?" Pedro shrugged. "Not sure. Boss thought you might have better luck." Without hesitation, Livia hurried to the stables. The large building was unusually quiet as she entered, with only a few low lamps burning. Thunder's stall was at the far end, and as she approached, she saw no signs of distress from the horse. In fact, he seemed perfectly calm, munching contentedly on fresh hay. "Thunder?" she called softly, confused by the false alarm. "He's fine," Eduardo's voice came from behind her. "I just needed an excuse." Livia turned to find him standing in the shadows, looking slightly sheepish. "You could have just asked to see me," she said, unable to keep the smile from her voice. "I wasn't sure you were ready." Eduardo moved closer, the golden lamplight illuminating his face. "And I wanted to show you something." He gestured toward Thunder's stall, and for the first time Livia noticed it had been transformed. The ordinary hay was arranged in a neat, comfortable bed, just like the one she had made for herself weeks ago. Beside it sat a small table with 2 cups of steaming coffee and a plate of cookies. "What is this?" she asked, puzzled. Eduardo opened the stall door. "I thought we should come full circle. This is where we met, where it all began." Touched by the gesture, Livia entered the stall, settling onto the hay bed. Eduardo joined her, careful to leave space between them. "Remember that first night?" he asked. "When I found you sleeping here?" Livia nodded. "I was so embarrassed." "You had nothing to be embarrassed about. I was the one who couldn't stop thinking about you afterward." He handed her a cup of coffee. "I came back the next night just to see if you were real." "You did?" This was news to Livia. Eduardo nodded. "You were sleeping so peacefully. I stood there watching you breathe, thinking about what kind of strength it takes to make a bed in a stable and sleep without complaint." "It wasn't so bad," Livia said softly. "The horses made me feel safe." "Is that why you chose the stable over the office Carlos offered?" Livia considered the question. "Partly, but also because it reminded me of something." She looked down at her coffee. "When I was very young, before my mother got sick, we visited a farm. I fell asleep in the hayloft and woke up surrounded by the most wonderful smells. Hay, horses, leather. I felt so peaceful. After she died and I went into foster care, I used to imagine that place when things got tough. It was the most she had ever shared about her past, and Eduardo listened intently, his eyes never leaving her face. "So when you came here and saw the stable?" he prompted gently. "It felt like coming home," Livia admitted. "Silly, right?" "Not silly at all." Eduardo's voice was warm with understanding. "Home isn't always a place. Sometimes it's a feeling, a memory." They sat in comfortable silence, sipping their coffee, watching Thunder occasionally glance their way with mild curiosity. "I've been thinking about what you said," Livia finally spoke, "about choosing me, about trusting what we feel." Eduardo set down his cup, giving her his full attention. "And?" he asked quietly. "All my life I've kept moving. Whenever things got complicated or people got too close, I packed up and left. It was easier that way, safer." Livia met his gaze directly. "But I don't want to run anymore, Eduardo." Hope flickered in his eyes. "What do you want, Livia?" "I want to stay," she said simply. "I want to build something real, the equestrian program, a home at the cottage, and—" She took a deep breath. "Whatever this is between us, I want to see where it leads." Eduardo reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "I want that too, more than anything." "But I need you to understand something," Livia continued, her voice gaining strength. "I don't want to be a charity case or someone you need to rescue. If we do this, we do it as equals." "You've never been a charity case to me," Eduardo replied, earnestly. "From the first moment, I saw your strength, your dignity. If anything, you rescued me from the half-life I was living after Maria died." The sincerity in his voice melted the last of Livia's reservations. For the first time in her adult life, she allowed herself to embrace hope without fear. "So," she said, her lips curving into a smile, "where do we go from here?" Eduardo's answering smile was radiant. "One day at a time, no pressure, no rush." His eyes twinkled mischievously. "Though I do have one suggestion for tonight." "What's that?" He gestured to the haybed they were sitting on. "Stay here with me, just talking, watching the stars through the window. Like our beginning, but this time, no more pretending we don't feel what we feel." The simple request touched Livia deeply. He wasn't asking for grand declarations or physical intimacy, just the chance to be together in the place where they first connected. "I'd like that," she replied softly. Eduardo leaned back against the hay, looking up through the small window where stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Livia settled beside him, their shoulders touching, a simple point of connection that felt profoundly right. Tatane talked late into the night about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Eduardo spoke of his parents' death when he was in college, how the ranch became both his responsibility and his refuge. Livia shared more about her years in foster care, her determination to be self-sufficient, the series of jobs that eventually led her to Alto Sky. "I used to think my wandering was a weakness," she admitted as midnight approached, "that I couldn't commit to anything or anyone." "And now?" Eduardo asked. Livia turned to look at him, their faces close in the dim light. "Now I think maybe I was just finding my way here. To this place. To you." The tenderness in Eduardo's eyes took her breath away, slowly. Giving her every chance to pull back, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers, a gentle, questioning kiss that asked rather than demanded. Livia answered by moving closer, her hand finding his cheek as the kiss deepened into something warm and promising. When they finally parted, both were smiling, a little breathless, a little amazed. "I've wanted to do that since the management dinner," Eduardo confessed. "When you walked in wearing that blue dress, I nearly forgot how to speak." Livia laughed, softly. "I couldn't stop looking at you either." Their second kiss was more confident, a bridge between what had been and what could be. Eventually, they settled back against the hay, Livia's head resting on Eduardo's shoulder as they watched the stars through the window. "You know," Eduardo murmured, "people will talk. Let them," Livia replied with newfound certainty. "We know the truth." 3 months later, the first snow of winter dusted Alto Sky Ranch in a blanket of pristine white. The equestrian program had launched successfully, with a waiting list of clients eager to learn from the trainer who had tamed Thunder. Under Livia's direction, the once unused South Pastures had been transformed into a premier riding facility, complete with a state-of-the-art indoor arena for winter training. Livia stood on the porch of the cottage, her cottage now, watching. The snowflakes drift lazily from a pearl-grey sky. Inside, a fire crackled in the stone fireplace, and the rich aroma of Eduardo's famous chili simmered on the stove. They had fallen into a comfortable routine of alternating dinners between the cottage and the main house, creating a balance that respected both their need for togetherness and their independent spirits. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention. As Eduardo approached on horseback, his tall figure bundled against the cold. Thunder followed without a lead, a testament to Livia's patient training. The magnificent stallion now responded to voice commands alone, a source of pride for both Livia and Eduardo. "Beautiful evening," Eduardo called as he dismounted, leading both horses to the small stable adjacent to the cottage, another of his thoughtful additions to make the property truly hers. "Perfect for our announcement dinner," Livia agreed, helping him remove the saddles. Tonight was special. After months of steady courtship, they had decided to make their relationship official to the ranch staff and Eduardo's close friends. Martha, who had known all along, had helped organize a small gathering at the main house. "Nervous?" Eduardo asked, brushing snow from his coat as they settled the horses for the night. "A little," Livia admitted. "Mrs. Oliveira will be there. Only because she's on the hospital board, and we need their support for the therapeutic riding program." Eduardo took Livia's hands in his. "She'll behave." Isabella declined the invitation, thankfully. The therapeutic riding program had been Livia's idea, using horses to help children with physical and emotional challenges. Eduardo had embraced it immediately, offering to fund the necessary adaptations to the facilities and reaching out to his contacts in the medical community. It was their first joint project, a perfect blend of Livia's expertise with horses and Eduardo's business acumen. "I should change," Livia said, glancing at her work clothes. Eduardo pulled her close for a quick kiss. "Wear the blue dress, for old time's sake." An hour later, they arrived at the main house together, Eduardo's hand warm and steady at the small of Livia's back. The blue dress, the same one from the management dinner, fit her perfectly, now altered to her measurements. Martha greeted them with knowing smiles and whispered good wishes. The living room was filled with familiar faces, Pedro and his wife, Carlos, whose initial skepticism had gradually given way to grudging respect, the ranch's accountant, and His husband, the local doctor, who would be consulting on the therapeutic program. And yes, Mrs. Oliveira, looking elegant but somewhat stiff. Eduardo cleared his throat as they entered, drawing everyone's attention. "Thank you all for coming tonight. Before dinner, Livia and I have an announcement to make." A hush fell over the room. Mrs. Oliveira's eyebrows rose slightly, but she remained silent. "As many of you know," Eduardo continued, "Alto Sky Ranch has always been more than just a business to me. It's my heritage, my responsibility, and now my future in ways I never expected." He smiled at Livia. "Thanks to this extraordinary woman." Livia felt a blush rise to her cheeks as all eyes turned to her. 6 months ago, such attention would have made her want to flee. Now, with Eduardo beside her, she stood tall, meeting their gazes with quiet confidence. "Livia and I wanted you to be the first to know that we're officially together," Eduardo announced, his voice firm and proud. "Not as boss and employee, but as partners in every sense of the word." There was a moment of silence. Then Pedro started clapping, followed quickly by Martha and most of the others. Even Carlos offered a reluctant nod of acknowledgement. Only Mrs. Oliveira remained expressionless, her lips pressed into a thin line. People came forward to offer congratulations. Livia noticed Mrs. Oliveira slip away to the terrace. After a moment's hesitation, she touched Eduardo's arm. "I'll be right back," she murmured. Eduardo followed her gaze, understanding immediately. "Are you sure?" Livia nodded. "It's time." The terrace was cold, the snow falling more heavily now. Mrs. Oliveira stood with her back to the door, a solitary figure against the white landscape. "Mrs. Oliveira?" Livia spoke softly. "Would you like me to bring you a coat?" The older woman turned, surprise flickering across her features at finding Livia instead of Eduardo. "No, thank you, I won't stay out long." Her tone was polite but cool. Livia moved closer, gathering her courage. "I know you care deeply for Eduardo, that you want what's best for him." Mrs. Oliveira studied her with shrewd eyes. "I've known Eduardo since he was born. I held him at his christening. I comforted him when his parents died, so yes, I want what's best for him." "And you don't think that's me?" Livia stated simply. "I don't know you," Mrs. Oliveira replied. "I know you appeared out of nowhere with no family, no background, and within months you've captured the heart of one of the most eligible bachelors in the county." The words might have wounded Livia once, but now she recognized them for what they were, fear disguised as concern, the protective instinct of someone who loved Eduardo in her own way. "I understand why you're suspicious," Livia said calmly. "If I were in your position, I might feel the same, but I'm not asking Eduardo for anything except the chance to build a life together. I don't want his money or his status. I just want him. The man who saw me at my lowest point and still believed I had value." Mrs. Oliveira's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. "He seems different with you, happier than he's been since Maria." "I would never try to replace her," Livia assured her. "She'll always be part of who he is, and I respect that." "And the ranch? You understand what it means to him?" Livia nodded. "It's his heritage, his responsibility. Now it's becoming mine too through the equestrian program. I take that seriously." Mrs. Oliveira was silent for a long moment, considering Livia with new eyes. "He told me about the therapeutic riding program for children. That was your idea?" "Yes, I've seen how horses can heal people, how they don't judge or demand, just offer companionship and trust." Livia smiled softly. "Sometimes that's all a person needs to find their strength again." Something shifted in Mrs. Oliveira's expression, a reluctant recognition, perhaps even the beginning of respect. "I still have my reservations," she said finally, "but for Eduardo's sake, I'm willing to give you the benefit of the doubt." It wasn't an endorsement, but it was a start. Livia extended her hand. "That's all I ask." After a brief hesitation, Mrs. Oliveira took it. The handshake was formal, but not hostile, a truce, if not yet friendship. As they returned to the warmth of the house, Eduardo met Livia's eyes with a questioning look. She gave him a small, reassuring smile. One more bridge crossed, one more obstacle overcome. Dinner was a success, the conversation flowing more easily as the evening progressed. Even Mrs. Oliveira, unbent enough to offer suggestions for the therapeutic program. leveraging her hospital board connections. Later, as they walked back to the cottage under a canopy of stars, snow crunching beneath their feet, Eduardo pulled Livia close against the cold. "That went better than expected," he remarked. "Your Mrs. Oliveira may come around eventually," Livia replied. "She loves you. That's something we have in common." Eduardo stopped in his tracks, looking down at her with wonder. "Is that your way of saying—" Livia's heart raced, but the words came easily now. "I love you, Eduardo. I think I have since that first night when you looked at me sleeping in hay and saw something worth knowing." Eduardo's smile was brighter than all the stars above them. "I love you too, more than I ever thought possible again." Their kiss was sweet and deep, snowflakes melting on their eyelashes as they held each other beneath the winter sky. "Come on," Eduardo said when they finally pulled apart. "It's getting cold." Hand in hand they continued toward the cottage, its windows glowing with warm light, a beacon in the darkness guiding them home. Spring arrived at Alto Sky Ranch in a riot of wildflowers and new beginnings. The therapeutic riding program launched, with 5 children enrolled, each making remarkable progress under Livia's gentle guidance. Thunder, once considered dangerous, now patiently carried the most fragile riders, sensing their needs with uncanny intuition. Eduardo expanded the ranch's operations, adding a small organic farm that supplied produce to upscale restaurants in town. He split his time between business responsibilities and helping Livia with the equestrian program, finding joy in their shared purpose. One perfect May evening, Livia sat on the cottage porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Nearly a year had passed since she first walked up the dusty road to Alto Sky, carrying nothing but a worn backpack and dwindling hope. Eduardo joined her, 2 glasses of lemonade in hand. They sat in comfortable silence, shoulders touching, enjoying the peaceful end of the day. "I have something for you," Eduardo said after a while, reaching into his pocket. He placed a small velvet box in her palm. Livia's breath caught as she opened it, revealing not a ring as she had half expected, but a key with a blue ribbon tied around it. "What's this?" she asked. Eduardo's eyes were warm with love. "A year ago, you slept in hay because you had nowhere else to go. Now you have this cottage, the equestrian program, a place in this community." He took her hand. "I want you to know that you also have a place in the main house, whenever you're ready." Tears welled in Livia's eyes. "Are you asking me to move in with you?" "Eventually, when the time is right." Eduardo brushed a strand of hair from her face. "This is just me saying that my home is yours too. No rush, no pressure. We'll know when it's time to take that step." Livia fingered the blue ribbon, remembering the day she'd left the stable. How she'd cleaned her haybed and left a note thanking Eduardo for his kindness. How empty she had felt walking away. "I have something for you too," she said softly. From her pocket she withdrew a folded paper, the note Eduardo had left on her hay pile that day, the one she had found upon her return. "You slept in hay, but in my heart. You already had a place." She had kept it all these months, a tangible reminder of the moment everything changed. "You didn't just give me a place to sleep," Livia said, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave me somewhere to belong, someone to belong to." Eduardo unfolded the note, his expression tender as he recognized his own handwriting. "You kept this?" It was the first time anyone saw me, really saw me, and still wanted me to stay. Eduardo gathered her close, his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her cheek. "And now?" Livia looked up at him, all her walls finally down, her heart fully open. "Now I know I'm home. Wherever we are together, that's home." As twilight deepened around them, Livia thought about the journey that had brought her here. The lonely nights, the closed doors, the constant struggle to find her place in the world. All of it had led to this moment, this man, this love that had begun in the most unlikely of places. She had arrived at Alto Sky Ranch with nothing, sleeping in hay because it was better than many places she had known. Now she had everything that truly mattered: meaningful work, a place to belong, and a love built on mutual respect and genuine understanding. Eduardo kissed her forehead, his arms secure around her. "What are you thinking about?" Livia smiled, remembering his words from that first night in the stable, words that had seen beyond her circumstances to the person she truly was. "I was thinking that you were right," she said softly. "Sometimes, the people who lie down on the ground really do have the entire sky hidden inside them. They just need someone who believes it enough to help them look up again." Eduardo's answering smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "And sometimes," he whispered, "the heart is the safest place to sleep of all." Together they watched as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Two people who had found in each other not just love, but home, the kind that couldn't be built with walls and roofs, but with trust, respect, and the courage to believe. In second chances, above them the stars of Alto Sky Ranch glittered like promises, witnesses to a love that had begun in hay and blossomed beneath the endless blue sky of possibility. The end.